The cantina on orbital station Kepler 7 was always busy. Traders, soldiers, and workers from dozens of worlds came here to drink and forget their troubles. But tonight, the place felt different, quieter. Everyone knew why. Commander Veltar sat, alone at his usual table in the corner. His four arms wrapped around a glass of green liquid that glowed softly in the dim light. The Nexus veteran looked old and tired. Deep scars covered his shell-like skin. Some were from plasma burns. Others looked like claw marks. All of them had stories. 3 young Nexus recruits walked over to his table. They moved carefully, like they were approaching a dangerous animal. Their instructor had told them about Veltar. He was a hero of the Coalition. He had fought in more battles than any living soldier. But looking at him now, they only saw a broken old creature who drank too much. "Commander," one of them said softly, "we are new recruits. We wanted to ask about the war." Veltar looked up with eyes that had seen too much. His compound eyes were like broken mirrors, reflecting pain and fear. He studied the young soldiers for a long moment. They looked so eager, so ready to fight for glory, just like he had been. "Many years ago?" "The war," he said slowly. His voice sounded like grinding metal. "Which war do you mean? The border conflicts? The trade wars? The rebellion on Titan 4? "The human war, sir," another recruit said. "We heard you fought against them." The glass in Veltar's hand cracked. Green liquid spilled across the table. The old commander did not seem to notice. His eyes went distant, like he was seeing something far away and terrible. "Humans," he whispered. The word came out like a curse. "You want to know about humans?" The recruits nodded eagerly. They had heard stories, of course. Everyone had. The Human Coalition War had ended 3 cycles ago with a peace treaty. But the details were classified. Veterans did not like to talk about it. Until now. "Sit down," Veltar said. "But know this. Once I tell you these stories, you will never sleep peacefully again. You will understand why we made peace, why we had to." The recruit sat down quickly. Veltar ordered another drink. His hands shook as he lifted it to his mandibles. "I will tell you about Captain Hyunwoo," he began. "A human pilot, the first human I ever saw fight, the day I learned that everything we thought about warfare was wrong." Veltar's voice grew steady as he remembered. It was easier to talk about the past than think about the present. It was at Proxima Station, a small mining outpost on the edge of human space. We thought it would be easy. 3 battle cruisers against 1 station. The humans had maybe 50 fighters, old ones. We had 300 of the best ships in the galaxy. He took another drink. The green liquid seemed to calm him. The battle started well for us. Our ships were faster, stronger, better armed. We destroyed most of their fighters in the first hour. The station's shields were failing. Victory was certain. One of the recruits leaned forward. "What happened?" "Hyunwoo happened," Veltar said. 1 pilot in 1 damaged fighter. His ship was leaking air. His weapons were mostly destroyed. His engines were failing. Any sane being would have retreated or surrendered. Veltar's eyes focused on something the recruits could not see. Instead, he attacked our flagship. Alone. The recruits looked at each other. That sounded like suicide, not strategy. "I was on the bridge of the Dominion's Fist," Veltar continued. "Our biggest ship, 50,000 crew members, shields that could stop a moon, and this one human in his tiny broken fighter came straight at us." Veltar stood up suddenly. His chair scraped against the floor. Other customers looked over, but quickly looked away. Everyone knew not to bother the old commander when he was remembering. "Our captain laughed," Veltar said. "He ordered the gunners to let the human get close. He wanted to show the crew how foolish humans were, how easily they died." The alien veteran began to pace. His 4 arms moved as he talked, like he was still fighting the battle. "Hyunwoo flew like no pilot I had ever seen. He moved his ship in ways that should have killed him, spins and turns that would crush most beings. Our computers could not track him. Our gunners could not hit him. Veltar stopped pacing. He stared at the recruits with those broken mirror eyes. Then we realized what he was doing. His reactor was failing. Instead of trying to fix it, he was making it worse. He was turning his ship into a bomb. The cantina seemed to grow quieter. Even the background noise of conversation died away. He flew straight into our engine bay. Not the bridge, not the weapons, the engines. He knew exactly where to hit us. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, like a new star being born. Veltar sat back down heavily. The electromagnetic pulse from his reactor disabled half our fleet. Our shields went down. Our weapons stopped working. Our navigation systems failed. In one moment, one human pilot had turned our certain victory into chaos. The recruits sat in shocked silence. This was not the kind of war story they expected. But he was dead, right? One of them finally asked. The pilot? Veltar laughed. It was not a happy sound. That is what we thought. But humans are hard to kill. He had ejected at the last second. While we were trying to restart our systems, he somehow got aboard our ship. A maintenance shaft, we think. He used his emergency plasma cutter to cut through our hull. The old commander's voice dropped to a whisper. For 6 hours, one human moved through our ship like a ghost. He sabotaged our systems. He left bombs. In critical areas, he sent false orders that confused our crew, 50,000 trained soldiers, and we could not find one human. Veltar finished his drink and looked at each recruit. When we finally caught him, he was in our main computer core. He had downloaded our entire battle plan, our fleet positions, our codes, everything. The recruits waited for the end of the story. We kept him prisoner for 2 days, Veltar said. Tried to question him. He just smiled, said his name, rank, and serial number. Nothing else. Just smiled like he knew something we did not. Veltar stood up again. This time he picked up his coat. On the 3rd day, human reinforcements arrived. They knew exactly where to find us, exactly how to attack us. We lost 2 ships before we could retreat. The old commander looked down at the young recruits one last time. That was my first lesson about humans. They do not fight like civilized beings. They fight like something wild and dangerous, and they never ever give up. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Hyun Woo was not a soldier, he said without turning around. He was a cargo pilot, civilian transport. He had volunteered for combat duty just 3 weeks before the battle. With that, Commander Veltar left the cantina. The 3 recruits sat in silence, staring at the empty chair and the cracked glass on the table. Outside, they could hear the normal sounds of the station, ships docking, people talking, life going on. But something had changed. They would never think about humans the same way again. The next evening, the 3 recruits returned to the cantina. They had spent the whole day thinking about Commander Veltar's story. Their sleep had been filled with dreams of human pilots and burning ships. They needed to know more. Veltar was sitting at the same table. The same green drink glowed in front of him. When he saw the recruits approaching, he did not look surprised. "You came back," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," the first recruit said. "We need to hear more." Veltar studied their faces. They looked different now, less eager, more worried. Good. Fear would keep them alive if they ever faced humans in battle. "Very well," the old commander said. "Sit. Tonight I will tell you about the siege of Titan Colony, about why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." The recruits sat down quickly. Veltar ordered another round of drinks. This story would take longer to tell. Titan Colony was a human settlement on the edge of their space, he began. A mining world. Nothing special. 50,000 people living in domed cities. Families, workers, normal civilians. Veltar took a long drink before continuing. The Coalition needed that system. The asteroid belt had rare minerals we required. For our war effort. High Command decided to take it. Simple operation. Surround the planet. Cut off supplies. Force surrender. He paused, remembering. We had 100 ships in orbit. They had maybe 20 defense platforms. Old ones. We expected them to surrender in a week. Maybe 2. The recruits leaned forward. They sensed this story would not go as expected. The siege lasted 8 months, Veltar said quietly. 8 months of hell. He stood up and walked to the cantina's window. Outside, stars glittered in, the endless dark of space. Somewhere out there was Earth, the human homeworld, the place that had taught the galaxy to fear. The first week went according to plan, Veltar continued. We destroyed their defense platforms. We blocked all supply. Ships. We sent surrender demands every day. They ignored us. The old alien turned back to face the recruits. Any civilized species would have given up. We had them completely surrounded. No food coming in, no weapons, no reinforcements. It was hopeless. Veltar sat back down heavily. But humans are not civilized. Not the way we understand it. They kept fighting. He began to describe what the coalition forces had observed during those long months. The humans did things that made no sense. When their military rations ran out, they ate things that would poison most species. They recycled everything: water, air, waste. Nothing was thrown away. I watched their communications, Veltar said. We intercepted everything. I expected to hear despair, panic, demands to surrender. Instead, I heard something that confused me. He paused dramatically. Jokes. They were making jokes. The recruits looked puzzled. Jokes, sir? Their soldiers would report terrible losses, and then make fun of their enemies. Their civilians would discuss starvation rations, and then laugh about who could make the worst-tasting soup. Children would play games in bomb shelters. Veltar's voice grew distant. I could not understand it. How can a species facing death laugh about it? What kind of madness was this? He told them about the broadcasts that kept coming from the colony. Every day, a human would get on the communication channels and give updates. Not military reports, personal messages, a teacher talking about her students, a miner discussing his work, a grandmother reading stories to children. They were showing us that they were still alive, Veltar realized. Still human, still unbroken. The old commander described the attempts to break human morale. Psychological warfare, propaganda broadcasts, threats, promises of good treatment if they surrendered. Nothing worked. The humans had a saying, Veltar said. They broadcast it every morning. Another day above ground is a good day. I heard it so many times I memorized it. He told them about So Young, the human medic who became a symbol of their resistance. She worked in the main hospital in New Geneva Dome. When the coalition bombing damaged the building, she moved her patients to the underground tunnels. When medical supplies ran out, she taught people to make bandages from clothing, and antiseptic from cleaning supplies. I watched her through surveillance drones, Veltar said. For months, I watched her save lives with tools that belonged in a museum, performing surgery with mining equipment, making medicines from plants in the hydroponic gardens. The recruits listened in fascination as Veltar described So Young's daily routine. She would work 18-hour shifts without rest. When the power failed, she operated by flashlight. When the anesthesia ran out, she taught patients meditation techniques to handle pain. She never stopped smiling, Veltar said wonderingly. Even when children died in her arms, even when she had to amputate limbs with a laser cutter. She would cry, yes, but then she would smile and move to the next patient. The siege grew worse as months passed. The coalition forces tightened their blockade. They bombed infrastructure. They cut communication lines. They did everything they could to break the human spirit. By month 6, they were eating food substitute made from algae and recycled organic matter, Veltar said. Their weapons were breaking down. Their defenses were failing. Any sane species would have surrendered. Instead, the humans adapted. They turned mining equipment into weapons. They used their industrial fabricators to make ammunition. When their soldiers fell, civilians picked up guns and took their places. Children as young as 12 were running messages between bunkers, Veltar said. Grandparents were standing, guard duty. Everyone fought. Everyone contributed. The old commander described the moment that had haunted him for years. During month 7, coalition forces had finally broken through the outer defenses of New Geneva Dome. Victory seemed certain. We expected them to surrender then, Veltar said. Instead, they destroyed their own infrastructure. They collapsed tunnels to slow our advance. They turned their own city into a fortress. So Young had been trapped in the hospital during the final assault. Coalition troops found her still operating on wounded civilians as explosions shook the building around her. She had refused to evacuate, even when the roof was collapsing. My soldiers brought her to me, Veltar said. I wanted to meet this human who had become legendary among our troops. She was covered in dust and blood. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion. But when she looked at me, her eyes were still defiant. Veltar remembered every word of their conversation. I asked her why they did not surrender, why they chose death over reasonable terms. She looked at me like I had asked why water was wet. The human medic had smiled at him. Even as a prisoner facing execution, she had smiled. She said, "This is our home. We do not give up our homes." Then she asked if she could return to her patients. The siege had ended 3 weeks later. Not because the humans surrendered, but because the coalition high command realized the cost was too high. They were losing more ships and soldiers taking one colony than they had in the previous 6 months of war. We withdrew, Veltar said, simply. 50,000 humans had fought 100 coalition ships to a standstill. They had won by refusing to lose. The recruits sat in stunned silence. This was not how wars were supposed to work. Superior forces should always win against inferior ones. That was basic military science. So Young returned to her hospital, Veltar continued. She spent the next 2 years treating the wounded and rebuilding what we had destroyed. She never left Titan Colony, never sought glory or fame. She just continued her work. Veltar finished his drink and looked at the recruits. That is when I understood what we were really fighting, he said. Not just soldiers or ships or weapons. We were fighting the human spirit. And spirits cannot be broken by force. The old commander stood up to leave, then paused. So Young was not a soldier, he said. She was a civilian doctor, a healer. Before the war, she had never seen violence. Her greatest challenge had been treating mining accidents and setting broken bones. He walked toward the door, leaving the recruits alone with their thoughts. If that is what their healers can do in war, Veltar said quietly, imagine what their warriors are capable of. The cantina door closed behind him with a soft hiss. The recruits remained at the table, staring at their untouched drinks. Outside, the window human ships moved peacefully through space, their crews conducting normal trade and diplomacy. But now the recruits knew the truth. Those calm, smiling humans carried within them something that had terrified the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The ability to endure anything, to fight anything, to never, ever give up. And that knowledge would change them forever. On the 3rd night, Commander Veltar was waiting for them. He had 3 drinks ready on the table when the recruits arrived. His scarred hands were steadier tonight, but his eyes held an even deeper darkness. You keep coming back, he said as they sat down. Good. Tonight you learn why ground combat changed after we met humans, why our tactics manuals had to be completely rewritten. The recruits had spent 2 days thinking about the previous stories. They had researched what they could find about human wars. Most files were classified, but what they learned had disturbed them. Humans fought differently than any known species. Tonight I tell you about Kepler 442b, Veltar said. A mountain world. The humans called it Hell's Gate because of the narrow passes through the peaks. We needed those passes to reach their industrial centers. He took a drink and continued. High Command assigned 3 divisions to take the mountains. 45,000 of our best troops, elite soldiers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, against maybe 3,000 human defenders. Veltar stood and walked to a wall display showing star charts. He pointed to a distant system. The battle should have lasted 3 days. We had air support, heavy weapons, orbital bombardment capability. The humans had small arms and whatever they could carry on their backs. The old commander turned back to face the recruits. The battle lasted 4 months. And we lost. He began to describe the initial assault. Coalition forces had landed at the base of the mountains in perfect formation. Their commanders had studied the terrain carefully. They knew every path, every cave, every possible defensive position. We expected the humans to fortify the main passes, Veltar said. Standard defensive doctrine. Hold the high ground. Force us to attack uphill. We were prepared for that. Instead, something impossible happened. The humans seemed to vanish. Our scouts found abandoned positions, empty bunkers, no sign of the 3,000 defenders. Our commanders thought they had retreated deeper into the mountains. Veltar's voice grew tense as he remembered. We were wrong. They had not retreated. They had become the mountains. The coalition forces began their advance up the narrow mountain paths. Everything went smoothly for the first day. Too smoothly. Experienced soldiers began to feel nervous. The silence was unnatural. On the second day, it began, Veltar said. He described the first attack. A patrol of 20 coalition soldiers simply disappeared. No distress calls, no weapon fire. They were there one moment, gone the next. Search teams found only empty equipment and some disturbing marks in the rocks. We thought it was an accident, Veltar said. A rock slide, perhaps, or equipment failure in the thin air. Then it happened again. And again. Small groups of coalition soldiers would vanish without a trace. Sometimes they would find bodies later, hidden in impossible places. Sometimes the soldiers were simply never seen again. Fear began to spread. Through our ranks, Veltar admitted. Soldiers started refusing patrol duties. They demanded to move in larger groups. Our commanders increased security, but it did not help. The humans were using tactics that no civilized military had ever seen. They moved through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. They struck without warning, killed quickly, and silently, then vanished like ghosts. We finally encountered one of their teams, Veltar said. 12 humans led by Sergeant Day-Ho. They were defending a pass we needed to control. The coalition forces had outnumbered the human squad by more than 200 to 1. Victory should have been certain. Instead, it became a nightmare. Day-Ho had been a construction worker before the war, Veltar said. He knew how to build things, but more importantly, he knew how to destroy them. The human sergeant and his team had spent weeks preparing their defensive position, not with standard military fortifications, but with traps that showed an intimate understanding of both the terrain and their enemies. They turned every cave into a kill zone, Veltar described. Every narrow path became a death trap. They used gravity, geology, and pure cunning to multiply their effectiveness. The coalition attack began at dawn. Their forces advanced in textbook formation, using cover and supporting fire. Everything went according to plan until they reached the first turn in the mountain pass. The explosion brought down half the mountainside, Veltar said. Hundreds of tons of rock buried our lead elements, but it was not random destruction. The rock slide left perfect firing positions for the humans while blocking our heavy vehicles. Day-Ho's team fought like no military unit Veltar had ever encountered. They did not hold fixed positions or follow standard tactics. Instead, They moved like predators hunting prey. They would attack from one direction, cause casualties, then disappear, Veltar explained. Before we could respond, they would strike from somewhere completely different. It was like fighting smoke. The humans used the mountain environment as a weapon. They triggered controlled avalanches. They diverted streams to flood coalition positions. They even used the high altitude and thin air against troops who were not adapted to such conditions. We could not find them, Veltar said in frustration. Our sensors, our drones, our surveillance equipment, nothing worked. They seemed to know the mountains like they had been born there. The psychological warfare was the worst part. The humans left messages for the coalition forces. Not threats or propaganda, but personal notes that showed they knew everything about their enemies. Names, unit assignments, even family details from personnel files. They carved messages in rocks where our patrols would find them, Veltar said. Things like, "Tell Sergeant Krelnak his eggs are ready to hatch," or "Commander Thexlon's mate sends her love." How did they know such things? The coalition forces began to break down mentally. Soldiers refused to go on patrol alone. They demanded constant communication checks. Sleep became impossible, because every sound might be human infiltrators. Deho's team was playing with us, Veltar realized. They could have killed far more coalition soldiers than they did. Instead, they chose to terrorize us, to break our will to fight. The siege of the mountain pass stretched on for weeks. The coalition forces had all the advantages: numbers, equipment, air support, orbital bombardment capability, but they could not use most of those advantages without destroying the infrastructure they needed to capture. The humans knew this, Veltar said. They fought a perfect defensive campaign. Every attack we made played into their hands. The breaking point came during the fourth week. Coalition intelligence had finally located what they thought was the main human position. A carefully planned assault was launched with overwhelming force. We found empty caves, Veltar said bitterly. They had been abandoned for days. While we were attacking shadows, the real human team was behind our lines, destroying our supply depot. Deho's squad had infiltrated 30 kilometers behind enemy lines, sabotaged critical supplies, and extracted themselves without being detected. Coalition forces woke up to find their ammunition dump burning and their communication equipment destroyed. That night, we received a message on our emergency frequency, Veltar said. Deho himself, speaking in perfect coalition standard. He thanked us for the training exercise and suggested we go home before someone got hurt. The final insult came the next morning. Coalition forces discovered that during the night, someone had painted human military insignia on their command vehicles. Sentries had been on duty. Sensors had been active. No one had seen anything. We realized we were not fighting soldiers, Veltar said quietly. We were fighting something far more dangerous. Humans who had become part of the landscape itself. The coalition withdrawal began 3 days later, not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they could no longer function as a military unit. Fear had destroyed their effectiveness more completely than any weapon. As we retreated, we kept expecting attacks, Veltar said. Harassment, pursuit, something. Instead, we found care packages. The human defenders had left supplies for the coalition wounded. Medical supplies, food, even entertainment files to help pass the time during evacuation. Each package included a note written in coalition standard. No hard feelings, safe travels. It was the most frightening thing of all, Veltar admitted. They could have killed us. They chose mercy instead. We never knew if they were watching us leave with compassion or contempt. Veltar finished his drink and looked at the recruits with those haunted eyes. 3 months later, Coalition intelligence learned the truth about Sergeant Deho's squad. They had been construction workers, miners, and mountain guides before the war. Civilians who volunteered for military service. He stood up slowly, his scarred form casting long shadows in the cantina's dim light. 12 amateur soldiers held off 3 divisions of our best troops for 4 months. They turned modern warfare into ancient hunting, and they did it with nothing but courage, creativity, and perfect knowledge of their environment. Veltar walked toward the door, then paused for his final revelation. When the war ended, Deho returned to construction work. He is building schools now, on worlds where human and coalition children learn together. But somewhere in his garage, he probably still has the climbing gear and camping equipment he used to terrorize 45,000 enemy soldiers. The old commander left the cantina, leaving the recruits alone. The 4th night was different. Commander Veltar was already drunk when the recruits arrived. His 4 hands shook badly as he lifted his glass. The green liquid spilled across the table, but he did not seem to notice. His compound eyes were focused on something far away and terrible. "You should not have come tonight," he said without looking at them. "This story, this one breaks people." The recruits sat down anyway. They had to know. The previous stories had changed how they saw the galaxy, how they understood war, but they sensed that Veltar had been building up to something worse than everything they had heard before. "Tonight, I tell you about Captain Mirai," Veltar whispered. "The human who taught us that mercy is sometimes the cruelest thing you can show your enemy." He took another shaky drink before continuing. She was a communications officer on a human transport ship. Young, maybe 25 standard years. This was her first deployment away from Earth. She had joined their Navy to see the galaxy, to meet new species, to explore. Veltar's voice grew even quieter. Instead, she met us. The story began during the height of the war. Human supply convoys were running through contested space, trying to reach their colonies. The coalition had been hunting these ships for months. Intelligence suggested they carried military supplies and reinforcements. "We found her ship near the Vega system," Veltar said. "The HSV Pacifica, a civilian vessel that had been converted for military transport. Minimal weapons, no escort, easy prey." The coalition battlecruiser Nexus Pride had intercepted the human ship during a routine patrol. Standard procedure was to demand surrender, search for contraband, then either seize the vessel or destroy it. "Captain Mirai was on the bridge when we attacked," Veltar continued. "Our first salvo disabled their engines. The second destroyed their weapons. We expected immediate surrender. Instead, the human ship fought back with everything they had. Mining lasers became weapons. Cargo handling equipment became missile launchers. The crew fought like they were defending their homeworld instead of an empty transport. We boarded, after an hour of combat," Veltar said. "My squad was part of the assault team. We expected to find military personnel, soldiers, warriors. They found civilian crew members, cargo handlers, engineers, cooks, and clerks. People who had never seen combat before this voyage. People who should have surrendered immediately when faced with trained coalition Marines. They fought us in the corridors with maintenance tools," Veltar remembered. "A human engineer tried to stop my squad with nothing but a plasma torch and incredible courage. We had to stun him 3 times before he would stop attacking." The battle for the ship lasted 6 hours. Room by room, corridor by corridor, the human crew made the coalition forces pay for every meter. When they finally reached the bridge, they found Captain Mirai still at her station, trying to send a distress signal with equipment that had been destroyed hours earlier. "She looked so young," Veltar said, but her eyes were already planning revenge. The coalition forces had captured 37 survivors from the human crew. Standard procedure was interrogation, then prisoner exchange or internment. The humans would be treated according to galactic war conventions. Veltar had overseen such operations dozens of times. "We moved the prisoners to Nexus Station Omega-7, he continued, a deep space facility with 8,000 crew members, maximum security. The humans would be safe there until the war ended." Veltar took another drink. His hands were shaking worse now. Mirai was quiet during transport, polite even. She followed orders, caused no trouble. Our guards thought she was in shock, traumatized by her first combat experience. The coalition prisoners were housed in a secure section of the station: comfortable cells, regular meals, medical care, recreational activities. Everything required. By interstellar law, the facility had held prisoners from dozens of conflicts over the years without incident. On the third day, Mireille asked to speak with me, Veltar said. She wanted to thank me for the treatment her crew was receiving. Said she understood that we were just following orders like she had been. Veltar remembered that conversation perfectly. The young human officer had been respectful, articulate, and seemingly grateful for coalition courtesy. She had asked intelligent questions about the station, the war, even Veltar's own military service. She was gathering intelligence, Veltar realized. Every question, every comment, every innocent observation. She was learning everything she could about us, our procedures, our weaknesses. The escape happened during the night shift change. Security cameras showed Mireille in her cell one moment and empty space the next. Alarms sounded immediately. The station went into lockdown. 8,000 coalition personnel began searching for one small human female. We never found her, Veltar said simply. She found us. The campaign of terror that followed had no name in coalition military manuals, no precedent in their history. One human, alone on an enemy station, had begun systematically hunting the people who had destroyed her ship and killed her friends. At first, we thought it was system malfunctions, Veltar explained. Environmental controls failing, gravity plating glitching, power fluctuations. Annoying, but not dangerous. Then coalition personnel began disappearing. Night shift workers would simply vanish. Day shift crews would report missing colleagues. Search teams would find empty corridors and strange noises in the walls. She was in the maintenance systems, Veltar said. The ventilation shafts, the power conduits, the water recycling pipes, places too small for our species to follow. She had turned our own station into her hunting ground. Mireille began leaving messages. Not threats or demands, but personal notes that showed she knew intimate details about station personnel, their schedules, their fears, their families back, home, information that should have been impossible for a prisoner to obtain. Ensign Kextar found a note in his locker, Veltar remembered. It said, "Your daughter's graduation is next month. You should live to see it." How did she know about his daughter? How did she access our personnel files? The psychological warfare escalated. Coalition crew members would find their personal belongings moved, their quarters rearranged, photos of their families left in impossible places with messages written on the back. Always polite, always personal, always terrifying. She was showing us that she could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time, Veltar said. Our security meant nothing to her. Our weapons were useless. She had become invisible. The station's commanding officer declared a state of emergency. All personnel were confined to quarters except for essential duties. Armed guards patrolled in groups. No one was allowed to be alone, ever. It did not help, Veltar said bitterly. Pairs of guards would disappear together. Entire patrol squads would vanish without a trace. She was always one step ahead of us. The turning point came during the third week. Station personnel were finding bodies now. Coalition soldiers and crew members who had been killed silently, professionally. But there was something strange about the deaths. She was not killing randomly, Veltar realized. She was targeting specific people. The crew members who had boarded her ship, the guards who had mistreated her people, the officers who had given the orders. Mireille was conducting a precise campaign of vengeance. She had identified everyone responsible for the destruction of her ship and the death of her crew. One by one. She was hunting them down. My squad leader was found in his quarters, Veltar said quietly. No signs of struggle, no alarms triggered. Just a note on his desk that said, for Engineer Thompson, one of the humans who had died defending the Pacifica. The station's population was in complete panic. 8,000 trained military personnel were cowering in their quarters, afraid of one human female who weighed less than most coalition weapons. Work details required armed escorts. Essential systems began failing as crew members refused to enter certain areas of the station. The worst part was the waiting, Veltar said. Knowing she was coming, knowing she was watching, knowing that locks and weapons and numbers meant nothing to her. Coalition High Command finally ordered the station evacuated. An entire deep space facility, one of their most secure installations, abandoned because of one escaped prisoner. But she had sabotaged the escape pods, Veltar revealed, and locked down the hangar bays. We were trapped on our own station with a human who wanted us dead. The final confrontation came when Coalition reinforcements arrived. A full battle fleet, sent to retake one space station from one human. The irony was not lost on anyone. They found Mireille in the main computer core, Veltar said. She had been there for hours, downloading classified information. Battle plans, fleet positions, intelligence reports, everything. The human captain was surrounded by dozens of heavily armed Marines. Her escape routes were blocked. Capture was inevitable. She should have surrendered. Instead, she smiled, Veltar said wonderingly, looked right at the Marine commander and smiled. Then she activated a program she had been writing for 3 weeks. Mireille's virus had spread through every system on the station. Life support, artificial gravity, structural integrity, everything began failing simultaneously. The station was destroying itself, and she was the only one who knew how to stop it. She offered us a deal, Veltar continued. Safe passage for her surviving crew. The 5th night arrived with a strange calm. Commander Veltar was sober when the recruits found him. His drink sat untouched on the table. His scarred hands were steady. His compound eyes held a clarity that had been missing for days. Somehow, this frightened the recruits more than his previous condition. "Tonight is the last night," he said as they sat down. "Tonight you learn why the war ended, why the mighty Nexus Coalition, with our 1,000 worlds and billion ships, chose to make peace with one small planet full of primitive apes." The 3 recruits had changed over the past week. They moved differently now, looked around more carefully, started at unexpected sounds. The stories had marked them, just as the war had marked Veltar. "You have heard about individual humans?" the old commander continued. "Tonight you learn the truth that High Command tried to hide, the truth that ended the war." Veltar stood up and walked to the cantina's main window. Outside, space traffic moved in orderly patterns. Human ships, coalition vessels, and dozens of other species conducted peaceful business. Trade routes that had been battlefields just a few years ago now carried families and tourists. "The war was going badly for us," Veltar said simply. "Oh, we controlled more systems, had more ships. Our technology was superior in every measurable way. But we were losing." He turned back to face the recruits. "Do you want to know why?" The recruits nodded. They had to understand. The stories they had heard made no sense according to everything they knew about warfare. Superior numbers and technology should always defeat inferior forces. That was basic military science. "Because we discovered something that terrified High Command more than any weapon," Veltar said. "We learned what ordinary humans could become when their survival was threatened." The old alien returned to his seat but did not drink. His voice remained steady as he began the final revelation. "Captain Hyun-woo, the pilot who destroyed our flagship with a damaged fighter. Do you remember his story?" The recruits nodded. "I told you he was a cargo pilot who volunteered for combat duty. What I did not tell you was his background. Before the war, Hyun-woo transported medical supplies to remote colonies. His greatest challenge had been navigation through asteroid fields. He had never fired a weapon in anger." Veltar let that information settle before continuing. "So young, the medic who held Titan Colony together during the siege. Before the war, She worked in a civilian hospital on Earth. Her most complex procedures had been removing appendixes and setting broken bones. She had never treated combat wounds. Recruits began to understand where this was leading. Sergeant Day-Ho, who turned mountains into weapons and terrorized 3 coalition divisions. Before the war, he built houses and shopping centers. His military training consisted of 6 weeks in a basic combat course. Veltar's voice grew quiet, but remained steady. Captain Mireille, who single-handedly took control of a military space station. Before the war, she maintained communication equipment and filed reports. She had never even seen the inside of a prison, much less planned an escape. The old commander looked at each recruit individually. They were ordinary humans, normal civilians, who had been forced into extraordinary circumstances. And that realization broke our entire understanding of warfare. Veltar explained how coalition intelligence had spent months analyzing human military capabilities. They had studied Earth's armies, their weapons, their tactics. Everything suggested that humans were technologically inferior but competent fighters. A challenge, but not an impossible one. We prepared to fight their soldiers, Veltar said. Instead, we found ourselves fighting their entire species. The Coalition's greatest mistake had been assuming that humans fought like other civilized species, that they had professional armies separate from their civilian population. That warfare was conducted by specialists while ordinary citizens remained safely in the background. Humans do not have civilians in the way we understand the term, Veltar realized. They have people who are not currently fighting, but when threatened, any human can become a warrior. The stories Veltar had told were not exceptional cases. They were examples of a pattern that had repeated across every battlefield of the war. Teachers became snipers, farmers became saboteurs, artists became spies, children became messengers, grandparents became guards. We were not fighting an army, Veltar said. We were fighting an entire species that had decided to survive. The Coalition's superior technology and numbers became irrelevant when faced with an enemy that refused to accept defeat. Every victory cost more than it gained. Every conquered system required massive occupation forces to control. Every human captured might escape and wreak havoc behind enemy lines. High Command began receiving reports that made no sense, Veltar continued. Cargo pilots performing impossible maneuvers, doctors becoming legendary military leaders, construction workers defeating elite special forces, engineers building superweapons from spare parts. The Coalition's own military doctrine was based on the assumption that warfare was conducted by professionals, trained soldiers with years of experience and specialized equipment. The idea that amateurs could match or exceed professional performance was incomprehensible. But humans had something we did not understand, Veltar said. They called it motivation, the drive to protect what they loved. And that motivation could transform anyone into something dangerous. Veltar described the moment when Coalition leadership finally comprehended what they were facing. Intelligence reports from hundreds of worlds told the same story. Ordinary humans performing extraordinary feats, civilians becoming legends. People with no military training defeating seasoned veterans through courage, creativity, and sheer determination. We realized that we were not fighting for territory or resources, Veltar said. We were fighting for species survival, and humans had decided that losing was not acceptable. The Coalition could have continued the war. Their resources were vast. Their technology remained superior. But the cost would have been measured in centuries and trillions of lives, because every human they killed would be replaced by someone equally determined. Every victory would inspire greater resistance. We were fighting a species that had weaponized love, Veltar said wonderingly. Love for their families, love for their homes, love for their way of life. And there is no defense against that kind of motivation. The peace negotiations had been unusual. Instead of demands for territory or reparations, the humans had made only one request: to be left alone. They wanted no conquests, no tribute, no submission from their enemies, just the right to exist in peace. They could have demanded anything, Veltar said. We would have agreed to almost any terms to end the fighting. Instead, they asked for nothing except what should have been theirs by right. The old commander stood up and walked back to the window. Human ships continued their peaceful business, their crews unaware that they were being discussed. The war ended because we learned something that no military academy teaches, Veltar said. Technology and numbers mean nothing compared to the will to survive, and humans have more of that will than any species in the galaxy. Veltar returned to the table one final time. Today, human children and coalition children attend school together. Human engineers help build our ships. Human doctors treat our sick. Human artists create beauty that brings tears to our compound eyes. He looked at the recruits with an expression that might have been relief. They are the kindest, most generous species I have ever encountered. They share their knowledge freely. They offer aid to anyone who needs it. They treat former enemies like old friends. Veltar picked up one of his untouched drinks and held it up like a toast. But never forget what I have told you. Never forget what ordinary humans can become when something they love is threatened. Because somewhere beneath every smile, every friendly gesture, every act of kindness, lies the same spirit that turned cargo pilots into legends and clerks into nightmares. The old commander drained his glass in one gulp. The humans have a saying: speak softly and carry a big stick. They are the stick, all of them, every single one. And the galaxy is a more peaceful place because everyone now understands this. Veltar stood up slowly and gathered his coat for the last time. You wanted to know about the war, he said. Now you know. Humans are not our enemies anymore. They are our friends, our allies, our trading partners. But they are also the most dangerous species in known space. Remember that, respect that, and pray that you never give them a reason to show you what ordinary people can do when they decide that dying is preferable to defeat. The old commander walked toward the door, then paused for his final words. Tomorrow, human delegations will arrive for the quarterly trade conference. You will see teachers, farmers, engineers, doctors, and artists. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Smile when you meet them. Be polite. Show them the respect that all civilized beings deserve. Veltar's scarred form disappeared into the corridor outside the cantina, but never forget that any one of them might be capable of taking down an entire space station with nothing but determination and spare parts. The three recruits sat alone in the cantina, surrounded by the normal sounds of station life. Tomorrow they would begin their military careers, serving a galaxy that was more complex and dangerous than they had ever imagined.